Everyone, welcome to episode 4 of A Practical Guide to the Tower. In today's episode, it's basically a filler in preparation for the next episode where we shall cover modules. The next episode is going to be a good one. I've spoken to a few other tower content creators at various stages of progression, and the plan that I have is to get them to provide their perspectives on modules at their various stages of progression. As I will ask them to share about which modules they use for farming and for tournaments, I thought it would be useful for us to familiarize ourselves with the various farming strategies they use so that we can understand how module interactions affect their various strategies. I do not intend to cover each strategy in great detail since there are already a ton of guides out there that can cover the mechanics in much greater detail than I can. Rather, my goal is to briefly show the various strategies in action so that when we cover the module interactions in the next episode and we hear terms that other players might use, we do not find ourselves confused about what those terms are actually referring to. So, without further ado, let's get into our first popular build, the Blender. So for the Blender strategy, as an overview, it basically uses orbs to destroy enemies, and we use attack speed to juggle enemies around our range line to knock back the enemies so that they can be hit by our orbs. It is the typical starter build, it has the lowest entry requirements, and it's basically just a set and forget strategy. However, coin gain is typically a bit lower in the early stages of the game because of the low durations and low uptime on your ultimate weapons. As a result of killing enemies very quickly, we don't get a hoarding of enemies that can be tagged with all our coin bonuses, and so that's how it affects our coins adversely. Now in terms of the setup for Blender, it's very similar to the strategy that I'm using. Basically, we just try to max out all our stats. Okay, so we just try to max out all the stats that we can, and at some point, if you do get into attack and health level skips, you might also want to bring up those levels. However, since this is a very early game strategy, for realistic purposes, I think most players will end up with something where we don't unlock Ren chance. Maybe you might not even unlock your super crit chance. And for your defense upgrades, you'll probably not have your wall upgraded at all. And probably you won't have your attack level skips and health level skips unlocked in the utility tab. Nonetheless, the strategy is very simple. All we have to do is just start the battle. Let me toggle off all my ultimate weapons, except for those that generate coin income. Okay, and so basically the strategy is, as you can see, I just try to juggle as many enemies as I can around my range line so that when my ultimate weapons come, I'm able to hit them. For the sake of the video, I think some people might notice that my damage number is in red and it's actually a very low number. This just comes from the damage slider. It's from the Harmony Vault upgrade. Okay, and so really there's nothing much to say about Blender. We just wait for the enemies to die to our orbs, and we just juggle the enemies. Moving on to popular build number 2, the Orb Devo. So under the Devo strategy, or there's a few of them, each Devo strategy basically means that we are devolving multiple stats in our workshop in order for us to increase the hoarding of enemies, which Blender does not provide. So the main reason why we want to hoard enemies is so that we can destroy enemies using orbs during our ultimate weapon activations under this strategy. The main pros of Orb Devo is that it generally results in higher coin income because we are killing enemies during the window of higher coin generation, and it allows us to develop a better understanding of the various mechanics of our tower. The main cons of Orb Devo is that it typically requires micromanagement and it's not as AFK friendly for most players. The reason for that is because we no longer use any free upgrades, and so this typically requires us to drop certain tiers and requires some level of lifetime coin in order for us to develop our workshops a little bit before we can proceed with this strategy. So as an overview for the strategy, the stats that we want to devolve typically are attack speed, attack range, multi-shot chance, rapid fire chance, bounce shot chance. For the defense tab, well, we don't really want knockback chance. We don't really want any orbs over here. Instead we will get our orbs from our extra orbs card. We don't want shockwave size and frequency because that pushes the enemies back towards our range line and then they get killed by the orbs. We don't want landmine chance as well because landmines might kill the enemies. So typically for this strategy, most players have not unlocked the wall, and so just to keep things simple, I've also decided to not unlock the wall. In terms of the utility upgrades, this is how they typically look like. Basically, we don't want any free attack upgrades, free defense upgrades, free utility upgrades. Everything else we can just sort of max it and get your attack and health level skips as high as possible. Now, it's worth noting that under this strategy, there's really no need for enemy health level skips because essentially we'll be trying to kill enemies using our taunts. Now, you might notice that I didn't put any taunt damage over here. The reason is, well, if I increase my taunts, it's going to result in enemies slowly killing themselves as they hit my tower, and so it becomes a bit of a balancing act. You have to decide whether or not the enemies are killing you too quickly. If they are, you might want to increase your taunt damage so that there are less enemies around your tower. And if they are not, then that's great, you can get away with lower taunts. So for the sake of this video, I'm just going to keep my taunts percentage at level 10, okay, at 10%. So enemies are going to take like 10 hits before they die. In terms of the enhancements, if you do have enhancements unlocked, you don't really need anything in attack. For the defense side, getting your health regen and wall health up is going to help with your survivability. If you wanted to increase in your orb size, that's also okay, but it's not necessary. In terms of the utility enhancements, having a lot of cash is going to be good because we don't have any free upgrades to rely on. So having more cash allows us to buy more upgrades in run. Coin and cells are obviously good. We don't want anything in free upgrades, and because we are not running with the wall, recovery package plus is a decent upgrade. Enemy health level skips, or well, enemy attack level skips will be useful, so this enhancement is also going to be useful. Now, to look at some of the gameplay, essentially the enemies are going to come in, but because I've got very low attack speed, they're just going to horde around my tower. And at some point when my ultimate weapons activate, they are all going to be pulled out towards my orb line, and my orbs are just going to take care of the rest. And there we go, we can see like as my black hole activates, the orbs start trimming the enemies, and although bosses are not being trimmed because they are planting themselves at my tower line, and I have 10% of taunts, at some point they will just kill themselves. And so this strategy basically rinses and repeats. Right? At some point, if we notice that we are unable to survive any longer, then what we might want to do is to just, I guess, undevo our workshop, right? And just get the free upgrades and let the run end naturally from there. But that is personal preference. Some people wouldn't even bother with it. But essentially, the main strategy that revolves around this Orb Devo is just hoarding of enemies until we get our ultimate weapon activations and we use our orbs to kill the enemies then. Alright, moving on to Orbless. So the next one is Orbless Devo, and essentially it works the same as Orb Devo, except that now we are no longer going to be using orbs. And this is typically referred to as the hybrid build, where we destroy enemies using damage during our ultimate weapon activations. The reason for that is that it allows for better hoarding without ops trimming, and it increased our ability to destroy enemies only when our ultimate weapons activate. Now, why might people actually want to consider Orbless strategy? It's because at some point you are going to have very, very high uptimes on your ultimate weapons. Once your ultimate weapons get to something similar to what I have with my Death Wave, Golden Tower, and Black Hole cooldowns, you are going to have very high uptime on those 3 ultimate weapons, and they may even be permanent. And so if Black Hole is permanent, it's going to pull enemies to your range line, and if you have extra orbs running at your range line, it is going to trim the enemies and you no longer get the hoarding of enemies. So what we want to do to counteract that is basically we just take out our extra orbs, and in terms of our setup, everything basically stays the same. We might want to increase our Thorns damage all the way to the max, because it's no longer going to be the case that enemies are going to be hitting us very much. But everything else basically stays the same. Now, because it's a damage reliant build, it's good to have some amounts of damage investments. What I've done over here is it's not a very good idea to keep damage above crit factor, but essentially crit factor should be slightly higher than damage. But onto the gameplay, essentially it looks very similar to the Orb Devo strategy, except we no longer have our orbs circling the tower, so that when our ultimate weapons activate, as we'll see shortly, like when my Black Hole activates, enemies go to the range line, and I'm going to try to kill all the enemies when they are at the range line with my damage. There are multiple ways that people would go about getting damage. For a start, some people might turn on their smart missiles, in which case the smart missiles will just destroy the enemies for you. Some people might also decide to turn on their smart missiles or their chain lightning. Now, it's very dependent on whatever strategy you decide to use, but any way to kill the enemies is okay, as long as we are not killing them too quickly. For instance, if I were to say turn on my chain lightning, then I'm basically just going to kill all the enemies, which is not going to be a good thing. Right, on to the next popular build, which is Orb Devo. So under this strategy, it sort of resolves some of the main difficulties of Devo, in that, you know, it's very micro intensive where we have to do our upgrades. And the way this strategy works is it uses free upgrades mastery to lock certain stats. We still want to devolve certain stats in our workshop. There are a couple of pros and cons to this. It's definitely more AFK friendly than Orb Devo or Orbless strategies, and it has more coin income than Blender. However, during the middle of the run, we can potentially experience lower coin income than, say, an Orbless strategy. The next con is that it obviously requires a card mastery, which makes it quite an expensive strategy to employ. Now, how does this work? Well, essentially it's the same kind of setup as Devo. We can choose to upgrade certain stats, but because we are now running with free upgrades, we can actually just max out our free upgrades. Now, because of free upgrades, eventually all our stats are going to be maxed out, and that's where we want to use strategically our free upgrade card. Now, with the card mastery, it allows us to lock certain stats from being upgraded. And a couple of popular builds that people might run is, well, maybe we might decide to run with, say, a Black Hole Digester, just so that our range is going to be locked for us. Okay, and we'll never have to worry about locking our range. Now, so in the middle part of this strategy, if we do not lock our attack speed, at some point, when our Death Wave wall breaks, the attack speed being high is going to result in us killing the enemies too quickly. So we might want to lock attack speed just so that we don't suffer a dip in our coin income during the middle stages of the run. We might also want to lock certain stuff like orbs so that we don't end up being an Orb Devo strategy with this setup, right? So locking orbs would be good. We might also want to lock out our landmine chance, and everything else is just going to be the same as before. So in terms of the gameplay for this setup, we just go our run as per usual, but because attack speed is going to be locked up, range is going to be locked up by the Black Hole Digester, we are just going to be killing the enemies during our ultimate weapon activations. And I forgot to switch off my damage. So during our ultimate weapon activations, we get to kill the enemies. And essentially this works very similar to the Orbless strategy, but because we have free upgrades now, we don't really have to worry about our attack and health level skips not being upgraded sufficiently. They will eventually be maxed out. Right, and finally, for our last popular build, it's the Glass Cannon build. Essentially, this build is basically Blender, but with damage. The objective is to just kill the enemies or be killed by them. The main pro of Glass Cannon is that it allows us to farm tier 14 and above reliably. However, it does require significant ultimate weapon development since damage is mostly tied to stones, and it requires significant card masteries in order for us to pull it off. So this is how my farming setup typically looks like. And I think you guys would have seen this multiple times before. So damage tab over here, I don't really need anything for health, and my utilities are going to look something like that. Oh, I can get one level into this. That's awesome. Okay, so in terms of the overall setup, we go into the run, everything else is turned on. We want to max out our health level skips, but other than that, we just basically juggle the enemies around our orb line until our ultimate weapons proc, and then we just trim the enemies with our orbs. The only reason why we need damage in this build is just to ensure that we can kill the bosses and kill the elites. As the enemies start doing very high damage in these higher tiers, we are no longer able to tank the enemies, so we need to kill the enemies before they actually hit us and kill us. Right, so that is it for all the different farming strategies that are popular and that I know of. So hopefully when we have the next video and we hear people talk about their different module synergies with their farming build and so on, at least everyone has an understanding, a rudimentary understanding of how these different strategies work, so that you don't feel that you are too confused when we are talking about those strategies. Right, have a good one everyone. I look forward to making the next video, and I hope that everyone is as excited as I am as well. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye!